Hey everyone, it's Justin, and today we're going to talk about should you switch decks heading into an important tournament. So, a lot of our community is getting ready for PQs and maybe going to 1Ks or store showdowns. And for the most part, we've been playing this game for almost a year now, and we might have a pet deck. We might have a deck that's sort of our go to that we're ready to take to tournaments. For me personally, that deck is Sabine ECL. It's performed really well for me, and I feel comfortable. And it's been the deck that I haven't really had to think too much about as I've scheduled my planning for events. So when I went to Gen Con, I knew I was playing Sabine. When I went to a couple 1Ks in the last couple months, I was like, yeah, I'll rock out with Sabine. It's super powerful, and I feel comfortable with it, and I have a lot of experience with it, right? But now, as we're looking at results and you're looking at metas develop, you might see some decks that are performing better. And you also might recognize that your own deck, for me, it's Sabine, has some challenges, right? We've had to overcome some challenging matchups, some challenging cards, a focus on our deck. If our deck is really powerful, there's going to be sideboard slots that are devoted to beating our deck, and really even many times like sort of a strategy. No one's going to go to a tournament and sort of not be ready for Sabine, right? So it brings up the thought process of where is my deck at in the meta, and should we potentially switch to something that we're seeing that's more powerful in the meta? And a little preview, as you can see from the screen, for me, it's going to be that Han1 yellow cunning deck. That's the deck that I would switch into if I was getting off of Sabine. So first, let's get into sort of a temperature check of your own deck. So for this video, I'm going to do it through the vantage point of Sabine. However, if you're playing something else, maybe it's Django, maybe it's Quinlan, maybe it's Bosk, maybe really anything, right? You should do it through the vantage point of your deck. So first thing I would think you should look at is, you've got this event coming up. For me personally, I've got a PQ on the horizon, and you're looking at what are you seeing in the meta, right? So we're seeing the rise of Han1. It's doing very well. We're still seeing those boss decks, those decks with villain, Lieutenant Charleston and top targets. They're popping up. And then we're also seeing, the Quinlan and the Django and the Tarkentown especially being things that are challenging for us. So I put these cards on the slide to sort of show that, it's not so easy for Sabine anymore. We're not seeing Vader ECL decks really played. We're seeing Quinlan Tarkentown is going to kill our unit. Django is going to kill our unit with ISB agents, our first turn play. We're seeing cards out of those decks like Force Throw or Cunning out of the Han1 decks, or an early Falcon. There's all these things that when we play against those decks, it's not so easy, right? These matchups are not sort of gimmies by any stretch of the imagination, and oftentimes we have tight matchups or even ones that seem like we're unfavored. So that starts to put in your own mind a little bit of like, should I stick with the deck that I actually have a lot of experience with? So my first thought, and what I've looked at the last couple of weeks and helping out really the KTOD Discord community with various lists is, well, can we do some things that can help us get ahead of the current meta, right? Can we look at cards or strategies to get ahead of, in my mind, the sort of expected meta is the Tarkentown decks, now the Han decks, and then these more controlling villain decks like Bosk, or even some of the blue, green, black decks that are overwhelming barrage. And then one of the things I'm prioritizing a little bit less, but still is there a lot, are the hero blue decks, like the Anakins and the Rays, but they still exist. So we want to have that in mind when we're making our adjustments to our deck. So let's look at some of the cards that I've done, again, through the Sabine vantage point, but you'd want to do that through the eyes of your deck, right? So getting ahead, well, one of the cards that's been really effective for Sabine has been Sundari Peacekeeper in terms of racing like a Django deck, or just putting a 5 toughness card that can really attack for 3 but then gain life. There's a lot of good benefits to Sundari. So we've seen that sort of big defense, that big butt unit that we want to play has been helpful in a lot of these matchups. So that's a card that we've seen in recent Sabine lists that have had success. The Friday SCG event was won by a list with Sundari's and also 2 copies of General's Blade to sort of have a new surprising angle, more consistency with upgrades, being able to have General's Blade and Darksaber in your hand when an opponent plays a Kira unit and looks at your hand and says, oh no, I can't name both of those cards, is a really powerful thing. So we're trying to get ahead with some cards that assist our strategies, right? Soldier of the 501st was a direct response to Quinlan, because Quinlan is playing most likely a 2-cost unit on turn 1. Well, if we play a couple 1s, we feel like we're supercharged in that matchup. So you try to get ahead. However, this gets a little exhausting, right? We now see that, as we're going week to week, when you're ahead 1 week, you're not going to necessarily be ahead the next week, right? Like Soldier of the 501st is pretty good against Quinlan, but I'm not loving it against a meta with lots of Bodies and lots of liberated slaves and lots of 3 power and larger than 2 toughness that they can kill our units, and keep theirs alive. So we have to keep evolving, and at a certain point, it sort of becomes this circle of you're evolving to a meta, but then you're still sort of handcuffed by what you're going to see actually at the tournament, and it's just a lot, right? We've got a lot of uphill battles to climb. So it begs the question, well, if we're working so hard to stay afloat essentially and stay competitive with a very competitive deck, should we switch to something else? So in my mind, if I was to switch off of Sabine, I'd be looking at the most powerful thing that I'm seeing in the meta, the deck that I think is the strongest, that's had the best PQ results over the first few weeks. Only if you attach the SEG to it, we're seeing that Han1 is the clear top dog now. So why aren't we playing Han1 if it's doing so well, right? Is there an easier way to approach the meta? You look at some of the challenging cards that I brought up, right? We're looking at Tarkentown. Well, Han1 gets to play 6 copies of shielded units on turn 1 if it wants to. It gets to play a bevy of 5 defense units if it wants to on the first turn, which Tarkentown doesn't instantaneously destroy. So you've got a good meta response to Tarkentown, and then you've got very powerful cards. You've got the Tech DJ combo. You've got Cunning. You've just got, similar to Sabine in how aggressive and oppressive that Sabine can come out in the early turns. Han is also doing an oppressive thing of stealing a resource, right? Bouncing all your units, discarding cards from your hand, and to the point on discard, Bodhi and Spark of the Rebellion against the boss decks. Cunning discarding a card, bouncing a unit with a bounty on it. You've got good answers there. So we're looking at a deck that maybe feels a little bit better positioned into the meta. So now we've identified what we might switch into. Oh, I'll just play it and win the tournament, right? Not so fast. You're not the only one who's thinking this. And then you also have to recognize, like, the experience that you've accrued by playing the deck that you have all those reps with doesn't just instantaneously transfer. Playing Sabine is very different than playing Han. So if you just shuffle up Han and you see a winning deck list, maybe it's Alex from KTOD that won SCG and also won a PQ, and you just take it and you shuffle up, and then you look at your opening hand and you say, well, do I play my 2-drop on turn 1? Do I play my 3-drop on turn 1? How does it work with all the matchups? So there's a lot of learning that you're going to need to do. And in my case, if I'm switching to Han1, I need to learn. Well, how do I go about doing that? Well, the first space that I would go to is find a community where you can get information from the people who put that time in. You can transfer that information ideally to you. This is something that, shout out to Austin from KTOD from our Discord, aka Sussybread. He has created a 14-page PDF for a Han Solo deck guide, and he has gone above and beyond anything that I've seen before in terms of deck preparation. He reached out to Alex from KTOD. He also reached out to Ian from the Bothan Network and really kind of just like interviewed them about their experiences with Han1. He goes into sort of a real deep dive on the matchups. I'm going to go ahead and preview a little bit of this document. It is, again, it's available on the KTOD Discord. Goes into sort of the basics. If you're wondering, like, how does the Tech DJ combo actually work? It's described in detail. You can see it right here. I'm talking about this combo. Goes into various board states. Does have an example deck list. Talks about the sideboard. Various matchups. I really like. Where do we have? He has the matchup where you're prioritizing the Tech DJ combo is high, medium, or low. And then towards the end of the document, he gets into detail on the matchup between Alex and Ian at the SCG finals, which is an incredible match to watch. And that was the Han1 Rebels version and versus the Han1 non-Rebels. So absolutely wonderful stuff. And to me, my first step is I'm going to go into our content and I'm going to download this on my computer. I'm going to put it in my ebook and I'm going to really just study this the same way I was studying for a test when I was in college, right? I'm going to look at all the information and really try to take in as much as I can, sort of from a wide angle. This isn't the only way to do it. You can certainly find local Han1 players in your play group, ask them questions, tap into your various communities. Maybe there's someone at your store who's won a tournament with Han1, and you can say, hey, let me pick your brain. Like, what do we do in different matchups, right? And Han, I think especially, has a lot of pivot points, right? You can play so many things on the first turn that your resourcing decisions and your first turn decisions are so intertwined that it really is a puzzle. And then just also knowing that you can use 7 mana on the 5th turn with Han, the 4th turn with Han, that sort of, your first turn and your 2 resource turn and your 7 resource turn are also sort of intertwined. So there's just so much complexity. And this is a great resource, and you certainly want to tap into something like this or other people in your community. The next thing you want to look at is, we started this whole conversation by saying our deck, in my case Sabine, has these issues, right? Tarkin Town, Han1, Boss, these are some troublesome things that we have to figure out. Well, when you switch, you're embracing that there's going to be matchups for that deck. In playing Han1, I've seen that Emperor Palpatine is a very challenging matchup to beat. Cards like Darth Vader are very tough. Cards that have strong enter the battlefield when played abilities are very challenging for bounce decks. So I want to identify what these matchups are, and then I want to learn about how to beat them, how to navigate, what does it look like when I beat them, what does it look like when I lose. And then I also want to understand those decks, what those decks are, because if I'm not expecting them in the meta, sure, I could see them at a tournament. It is a Star Wars game. People will play Palpatine because they like Palpatine. But if it's sort of, less expected stuff, I can feel comfortable switching if what I'm switching to has an auto loss against something that's not really played that much. But I want to know as much as I can. Now, this is a big one. We can't go back in time and play in a meta from 2 or 3 weeks ago. We're not the only ones that are seeing that Han1 is doing well and crushing. So there's going to be a response from decks. There's going to be people putting more effort into beating Han1 than ever before, really. We're seeing back-to-back weekends with Han1 doing well. So we are going to see more copies of Scanning Officer played in sideboards, but also probably in main decks. So we have to be aware of strategies and even decks, right? Maybe we do see a rise in Palpatine as an answer to Han1. And then we're also going to need to understand the mirror for the Han1 Cunning deck, and also the sort of flux capacitor, 2 sides of that, where you've got the Rebel version, and then you've also got the one with the 6 shielded units. You saw George win a PQ with Jetpack, so we're going to see variations on people trying to get ahead in the mirror using cards like Plo Koon, more copies of Gamorrean guards. So you're going to need to embrace that whole arms race in the mirror and get experience of just how the mirror plays out, right? Because it's very tricky. So that's something you need to spend a lot of time with. So all that being said, question, Justin, what are you doing at your next tournament? I do have a PQ coming up. And I think mainly because of the last slide, just like, I would have switched to Han1 sort of if I could have gone back in time and played 2 weeks ago. I actually really liked where it was at. But now that there's sort of a response to Han1, I'm actually going to stick with Sabine. I do feel like I have a lot of experience with Sabine, and that matters. I also feel like Sabine is still really, really powerful. And I just don't feel comfortable navigating the mirrors and sort of the response as well as I should. I do think Han1 is incredibly powerful if I don't top cut at my PQ with Sabine, I'll be okay with it. I'll say, listen, Sabine got me here so far, but now it's time. But I think up until I sort of fail with Sabine, I want to stick with her. But once I do, if I do, I'm happily ready to switch to Han. I wouldn't want to sort of flip that script, switch to Han, not do well, and then say, oh man, why did I switch off of Sabine? So I'm more comfortable sort of navigating that own internal feeling of like sticking with something that's been successful versus switching off of something that's been successful and regretting it after the fact. So I'm going to be playing Sabine with Scanning Officer, and I think I'd love to hear your thoughts just about where you are, about what decks you're switching off of, or where your decision points are, right? You see something online being played, it looks awesome. Should I switch to Django? Triple Dark Raid, super cool. Should I switch to Quinlan? Oh man, these Tarkin Town decks and Force Throws and all these cool things. Or, you know what? I like playing Avenger. I want to play Bosk. So I'm curious what your thought processes are in terms of your baby, your deck that you're playing, and what you're thinking about switching. And then if you're thinking about joining up on KTOD, definitely a great time. We've had a lot of new members join recently. And I think the deck guide, just to get another shout out to Sussy. That deck guide is new to us this week. It's not something that's existed. It's dropping at a similar time as this video. So for all of our members right now, definitely check that out. It is an awesome resource. We hope to get more of those things up in the future, but and just keep growing the game and the community. So that's it for now, everybody, and happy playing. Take care.